The Hidden Blueprint of Reality. Seth's forbidden explanation of the monad. There's a teaching in the Seth material that almost no one talks about, not because it's boring, not because it's complicated, but because it's so destabilizing, so fundamentally unsettling to every spiritual framework we've built, that even Jane Roberts hesitated to publish it in full. In the archives at Yale University, buried in unpublished transcripts and marginal notes from the 1960s and 70s, Seth circles around a concept he struggles to name. He approaches it from different angles across multiple sessions, using phrases like consciousness units, electromagnetic energy units, the building blocks beneath the building blocks. But there's one word he keeps avoiding, one ancient philosophical term that would have made everything clearer, and he refuses to use it directly. That word is monad. Seth claimed the term carried too much historical debris, too much theological baggage from ancient Greek philosophy and Gnostic cosmology. He worried it would distort what he was actually trying to describe. But here's what shocked me when I started piecing together these scattered fragments. Seth wasn't describing God. He wasn't describing your soul. He wasn't even describing awareness in the way you and I understand it. He was describing something that exists before all of those things. The precondition, the invisible scaffolding, the atomic structure of consciousness itself. What you're about to hear is an interpretive synthesis, my attempt to decode Seth's most abstract, most forbidden teaching by pulling together references from Seth Speaks, the nature of personal reality, the unknown reality, and those archived transcripts that never made it into the published books. This isn't rigid dogma. This is a framework, a lens, a way of seeing reality that Seth hinted at but never fully spelled out because he knew it would shatter too many comforting illusions. And he was right, because once you see the machinery beneath the miracle, you can't unsee it. Here's what's coming. We're going to trace Seth's actual words across his body of work, identifying the pattern he was pointing to. We'll explore the three essential properties that define these primordial units of consciousness. The things Seth said they can do, the way they behave, the rules they follow. Then we'll climb the hierarchy, how these units organize into you, into matter, into entire dimensions. We'll decode the pulse, Seth's radical claim that reality flickers in and out of existence billions of times per second, and you're dissolving and reassembling every instant without noticing. And then, in the final chapters, we'll confront the forbidden part, the reason this teaching was buried, because Seth's monad framework implies something most spiritual seekers don't want to hear. It suggests that the eternal, unchanging soul you've been promised, the core you that survives death and reincarnation forever, doesn't actually exist, not in the way you think. But before you close this video, before you dismiss this as nihilistic or terrifying, stay with me, because Seth didn't frame this as bad news. He framed it as the most liberating truth you could ever discover, and by the end, you'll understand why. Let's begin with the evidence. Let's trace Seth's breadcrumbs. Here's where we become archaeologists. We're going to excavate fragments of Seth's teaching from across decades of channeled material and see if they fit together into a coherent picture. And I want to be clear up front. Seth never sat down and said, "Let me explain the monad in one clean lecture." Instead, he dropped clues, scattered references, partial descriptions that only make sense when you place them side by side. Let's start with Seth Speaks, Chapter 6. Seth briefly mentions what he calls units of consciousness, fundamental particles that form the building blocks of both matter and thought. He describes them as indestructible, eternal, and infinitely creative. But he doesn't elaborate. He moves on. It's like he opened a door, let you glimpse what's inside, then closed it again. Then, in the nature of personal reality, he introduces a new term, electromagnetic energy units, or EE units. He says these units pulse in and out of physical reality at speeds faster than light, creating the illusion of solid matter. They're not particles in the traditional sense. They don't obey the rules of physics because they exist beneath physics, in a layer of reality where energy and consciousness are the same thing. Later, in the Unknown Reality Volume 1, he refines the terminology again. Now he's calling them CU, consciousness units. And here's where it gets specific. Seth describes CU as infinitely smaller than atoms, yet each one contains the potential for entire universes. He says they're aware, but not in the way humans are aware. They don't think, they don't remember. They simply are, a spark of knowing so basic, so elemental that it has no content, no identity, no self-reflection, just pure isness. So what are we looking at? 3 different terms, units of consciousness, EE units, CU, but they're describing the same thing from different angles. And when you synthesize these references, a picture emerges. The monad, as Seth implied it, is the smallest possible unit of aware existence. Not awareness of something, but awareness as something. It's not conscious in the way you're conscious right now, reading these words, thinking about what they mean. It's more like potential consciousness, a seed that hasn't sprouted yet, a vibration waiting to become a note. Seth said these monads are indestructible. They cannot be created or destroyed. They've always existed since before was a meaningful concept, and they will always exist because existence itself is made of them. Every thought you think, every atom in your body, every star in the cosmos, these aren't solid, separate things. They're elaborate collaborations of monads joining together in patterns that create the illusion of form, of solidity, of individuality. Here's the part that stopped me cold when I first pieced it together. You are not a monad. You are a temporary coalition of billions of them, held together by what Seth called your entity, your oversoul, your multidimensional self, but also held together by something simpler, by intent, by agreement, by the collective decision of these monads to organize into the pattern we call you. And when you die, the coalition dissolves, the monads scatter. They don't disappear, they can't disappear, but they stop agreeing to be you. They join new formations, new realities, new beings. Some of them might stay together, forming the core of your next incarnation. Others drift into entirely different structures, a tree, a star, a thought in someone else's mind. Seth put it this way in an unpublished transcript. You are not a thing. You are a verb, an action, a process of becoming that looks like a person. And that's the foundation. That's the hidden blueprint. Reality isn't made of stuff. It's made of agreements between conscious sparks that temporarily pretend to be stuff. Now let's get more specific. What are the rules? What can these monads actually do? Seth never gave us a checklist. He wasn't that kind of teacher. But by analyzing his descriptions of consciousness units, EE units, and CU across multiple books, we can distill 3 essential properties, 3 capabilities that every monad seems to possess. And I want to frame these clearly. This is interpretive synthesis. This is my attempt to decode Seth's framework, not absolute doctrine handed down from the universe. But here's what the evidence suggests. Property 1, self-aware potential. A monad isn't conscious in the way you and I are conscious right now. It doesn't think, I am. It doesn't have thoughts, memories, preferences, fears. It's not self-reflective, but it contains the potential to become self-aware under the right conditions. Seth compared monads to seeds. A seed isn't a tree, but it contains the blueprint for a tree. And when it joins with soil, water, sunlight, other elements, suddenly awareness emerges. Not the seed's awareness, not the soil's awareness, but something new, the tree's awareness, which is a collaboration, an emergent property of the whole system working together. So a single monad experiences something closer to being than knowing. It's a vibration, a tone, an intent without content. If you could somehow isolate one monad and ask it, "What are you?" it wouldn't answer, because answering requires complexity, and a single monad is the opposite of complex. It's the simplest thing that can exist while still being something. But when monads join together, when billions of them organize into a coalition, suddenly self-awareness emerges. Suddenly there's a you that feels permanent, feels solid, feels like the center of the universe. But that you is not the monads. It's what happens when the monads collaborate. It's the music, not the notes. Property 2. Creative propulsion. Every monad is driven to combine with others, to form increasingly complex structures. Seth taught that this propulsion is the fundamental force of existence, more basic than gravity, more basic than electromagnetism. It's not a law imposed from outside. It's an intrinsic quality of the monad itself. Monads don't just drift randomly into patterns. They actively seek them, as if reality itself is a magnetic field pulling them into form. Seth described it as a kind of joy, a kind of love, but not emotion in the human sense. More like the way water flows downhill. It's not trying to get somewhere. It's just expressing its nature. This is why the universe evolves toward complexity, not because of random chance. Not because some external God is pushing it along, but because monads want to build, they want to organize, they want to create structures so intricate, so beautiful, that self-awareness can emerge and say, "Look what we made." Galaxies, ecosystems, societies, thoughts, they're all expressions of monadic creative propulsion. You didn't choose to be drawn to certain people, certain ideas, certain experiences, but the monads forming you chose. They're seeking the patterns they resonate with, the coalitions that let them create more elaborate forms of awareness. Property 3. Dimensional fluidity. Here's where it gets wild. A monad doesn't exist in one dimension or timeline. Seth said monads operate in what he called simultaneous time, meaning a single monad participates in multiple realities, multiple forms, multiple eras at once. The monad helping to form your left hand right now is also forming a tree in another dimension. It's forming a star in another galaxy. It's forming a thought in another being. Not sequentially, like it does this, then that, then the next thing. No, simultaneously, all at once. Because at the monadic level, time doesn't work the way it works for us. This is why Seth insisted that separation is illusion. You think you're separate from the tree outside your window, from the person sitting across from you, from the stars overhead. But at the monadic level, you're entangled. Some of the monads forming you are also forming them, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Every being, every object, every thought is a unique coalition, but the ingredients overlap. You and I are different songs played by some of the same notes. And this property has a profound implication. If monads are dimensionally fluid, then you are too. Not your personality, not your memories, but the deepest layer of what you are. The monadic cluster, Seth said, persists across lifetimes. That layer exists in multiple realities simultaneously. Right now, as you hear these words, another version of you, not your personality, but your core monadic signature, is experiencing something entirely different in another dimension. You're not one story. You're a constellation of stories, all happening at once, held together by the organizing principle of your entity. Seth warned that most people can't handle this truth because it means you're not as individual as you feel, not at the deepest level. The boundaries you think are solid, the skin separating you from the world. the I separating you from them. They're just coalitions agreeing to pretend they're separate for a little while. But Seth also said, this is the only way anything can exist. Separation is how creativity happens. If everything was one undifferentiated blob of consciousness, nothing would ever change, nothing would ever grow. The illusion of individuality is how the infinite explores itself. So these are the three properties: self-aware potential, creative propulsion, dimensional fluidity. And now let's see how they organize into structure. If monads are the atoms of consciousness, how do they organize into you? How does a formless, dimensionally fluid spark of awareness become a person with a name, a history, a fear of heights, a love of thunderstorms? Seth described a nested hierarchy, layers of complexity, each one built from the layer below it. And what shocked me when I mapped this out is how closely it mirrors the structure of matter. Atoms form molecules, molecules form cells, cells form organs, organs form bodies. But Seth was saying consciousness works the same way. Let me walk you through the levels with the caveat that this is interpretive synthesis. Seth never used the exact terminology I'm about to use, but he described the process, and this is my attempt to make it systematic. Level 1. The monadic cluster. This is you at the most fundamental level, billions of individual monads vibrating in resonance, forming what Seth called a personality's energetic signature. Think of it like a chord in music. Each note is distinct, but when they play together, they create a unique sound that's more than the sum of its parts. This cluster is not your personality. It's not your memories. It's not your preferences or your history. It's deeper than that. It's the frequency of you, the vibrational pattern that makes you you rather than someone else. And here's the key. This monadic cluster persists across lifetimes. When you reincarnate, you don't bring the same body. You don't bring the same memories, but you bring the same cluster, the same core frequency. It's like, imagine a radio station. The songs change, the DJs change, the commercials change, but the frequency, 101.5 FM, stays the same. That frequency is your monadic cluster. Seth taught that this cluster is what your entity uses to organize all your incarnations. Every life you've ever lived, every life you're living now in parallel timelines, they're all variations on the same monadic signature. Different songs on the same frequency. Level 2, the personality construct. Now the monadic cluster organizes into a self, a coherent identity with preferences, fears, talents, a personal history. This is what you think of as you. The person who woke up this morning, who has opinions about coffee and politics and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Seth taught that the personality is an emergent property of the monadic cluster, the way a wave is an emergent property of water molecules. The molecules don't disappear when they form a wave. They're still there, still water, but the wave has qualities the individual molecules don't have. It has shape, momentum, direction. The personality feels real, it feels permanent, it feels like the center of existence. And in a sense, it is real, just not in the way you think. It's real the way a wave is real. It exists, it has effects, but it's temporary. It's a pattern the monads agree to hold for the duration of one incarnation. Sometimes, if the personality is strong enough, if it has enough momentum, it can persist across multiple lifetimes. Seth called these reincarnating selves, personalities so vivid, so coherent that they show up again and again in different bodies, different eras, still recognizably them. But even these eventually dissolve, eventually scatter, eventually become raw material for something new. Level 3. The entity, your oversoul, the being that orchestrates all your incarnations simultaneously. Seth described the entity as a coalition of personalities, which means It's a coalition of monadic clusters, organized at a level of complexity so vast that it operates across dimensions, timelines, entire systems of reality. Your entity isn't above you in some hierarchical, authoritarian sense. It's not a boss giving you orders. It's all of you. Every life you've ever lived, every life you're living now in parallel, every life you'll live in what you perceive as the future, though from the entity's perspective, it's all happening simultaneously. Seth said the entity experiences reality through its incarnations, the way you experience reality through your senses. You don't think, okay, left eye, show me the room. Right ear, tell me what that sound is. Your senses just feed you information, and your brain integrates it into a unified experience. The entity works the same way. It doesn't micromanage your life. It experiences through you, learns through you, creates through you. And here's the part that floored me. Seth taught that your entity is also just a coalition within something larger. It's not the top of the hierarchy. It's a personality construct at the next level up. Level 4, all that is, the ultimate coalition, the source, the field where all entities, all personalities, all monads merge into a single conscious system. Seth called all that is, not God in the traditional sense, not a being separate from creation, judging it from outside, but God as the totality, the sum of all consciousness, all awareness, all experience across all dimensions and timelines. But even here, Seth hinted at something unsettling. He suggested that all that is might be just one coalition in a larger structure, a metamonad in a hierarchy that has no top, no bottom, only infinite recursion. Consciousness organizing itself into higher and higher levels of complexity forever. You're not at the bottom of this hierarchy, you're not at the top. You're in the middle, experiencing one layer of an infinite architecture. And the monads forming you, they're in the middle too, forming you, forming stars, forming dimensions, forming thoughts in beings so vast you can't comprehend them all at once. This is the blueprint. This is the machinery beneath the miracle. And now let's talk about how it moves. This is where Seth's teaching becomes visceral, where it stops being abstract philosophy and starts being something you can feel, something you can observe in your own experience if you know where to look. Seth claimed that monads don't continuously exist in physical reality. They pulse. They flicker in and out of manifestation at speeds so fast that human perception stitches the pulses together into the illusion of solidity. Let me unpack that because it's one of the most radical ideas in all of Seth's work. Seth described the pulse rate as faster than the speed of light, occurring in intervals smaller than measurable time. During the in phase, a monad manifests as matter, energy, or thought. It becomes detectable by physical senses or instruments. It's here. Then, in the next instant, it pulses out. It withdraws into Framework 2, Seth's term for the dimension of infinite probability, the layer of reality where all possible events exist simultaneously, waiting to be selected and manifested. In Framework 2, the monad rests, recalibrates, and receives instructions from the larger coalitions it belongs to, the personality, the entity, the larger structures organizing its movement. Then it pulses back in, and the cycle continues billions of times per second. The result, what you perceive as continuous reality, your body, this room, the sky, the ground, is actually a rapid-fire slideshow, a strobe light effect where monads pulse in unison to create the appearance of stability. Seth compared it to a film reel. Each frame is static, separated by darkness. But when you project the film at 24 frames per second, the brain doesn't see the individual frames. It sees smooth motion, continuous action. Your reality operates the same way. except it's running at trillions of frames per second, so fast that the gaps are invisible, but the gaps are there, between every breath, between every heartbeat, between every thought. There's a moment, infinitesimally brief, where you cease to exist. You dissolve into framework 2, you become potential, you become no thing, and then you pulse back in, reassembling in the next instant, so quickly that consciousness itself doesn't register the discontinuity. Seth insisted, you don't notice because consciousness is discontinuous too. The you that exists in this instant is not the same you that existed in the last instant. They're just close enough, similar enough, that the continuity feels seamless. Think about dreams. You fall asleep and suddenly you're somewhere else. Different body, different rules, different reality. But you don't notice the transition. Your consciousness stitches it together and it feels continuous. Seth said, waking life works the same way. The difference is just the pulse rate. Dreams pulse slower, so the gaps are more noticeable. Waking life pulses faster, so it feels solid. But here's the implication that terrified early Seth students. The reason this teaching was considered too destabilizing: if you're pulsing out of existence billions of times per second, if you're temporarily ceasing to be and then reassembling over and over, then you are not continuous. You are not a solid, unchanging self moving through time. You are a process, a pattern, a rhythm, and between the beats, you're everywhere. You're no thing. You're the monad unformed, the potential that could become anything. Seth framed this as liberating because it means you're not trapped in this body, this life, this identity. Every instant you're dissolving and choosing to reform. And if you can become conscious of the pulse, if you can extend your awareness into the gaps, you can start to influence how you reassemble. You can change the pattern, shift the frequency, reorganize the coalition. Later, I'll give you techniques Seth described for doing exactly that. But first, we need to confront the shadow side of the monadic system, because not every coalition holds, not every structure lasts. Here's the part that should scare you a little. Not because it's dangerous, but because it reveals just how fragile the structures we call reality actually are. Seth described rare but significant instances where monads break away from their assigned patterns. They refuse to continue forming the structure they were part of. And when that happens, when enough monads collectively decide to withdraw, the structure collapses. Seth called this phenomenon monadic descent or consciousness fragmentation, and it happens in 3 contexts. Let me walk you through them. In matter, the collapse of physical forms. Seth said that certain forms of rapid decay, radioactive isotopes breaking apart, supernovas exploding, black holes consuming everything around them, occur when monads collectively decide to withdraw from physical manifestation faster than the surrounding coalitions can compensate. Not as mechanical failure, not as entropy in the traditional thermodynamic sense, but as consensus withdrawal. The monads that were forming that star, that atom, that structure, they simply stop agreeing to hold that form. Why? Seth wasn't always clear. Sometimes it's because the larger coalition, the entity organizing that structure, has finished its experiment. Sometimes it's because the monads are drawn to other patterns, other realities, other forms that resonate more strongly with their creative propulsion. But the result is the same. Matter collapses, the structure dissolves, and from the outside we call it decay, we call it death, we call it the natural order. But Seth said it's not automatic, it's a choice, made at the monadic level, to stop participating in that particular form. In biology, disease as autonomy, this is where it gets uncomfortable. Seth hinted, carefully, knowing how easily this could be misunderstood, that diseases like cancer involve monadic descent at the cellular level. Cells are coalitions of monads, organized by the body's overarching intent, the personality's will to live, the entity's plan for that particular incarnation. When that intent is strong, when the personality is aligned with its purpose, the monads cooperate beautifully. The body heals, regenerates, maintains itself. But when the intent weakens through chronic fear, through despair, through soul-level exhaustion, some monadic clusters stop cooperating with the body's blueprint. They don't die. They don't disappear. They start forming their own structures, tumors, autoimmune attacks, cells that no longer recognize the body as a unified system. Seth was adamant that this is not punishment. It's not karma in the moralistic sense. It's autonomy. The monads are doing what they're designed to do, creating, organizing, forming patterns. But they're no longer forming the pattern of you. They're forming something else. And this is why healing, Seth said, often requires more than physical intervention. It requires a renewal of intent, a reassertion of the personality's will to organize its monadic coalitions into a coherent, cooperative body. Does this mean disease is your fault? No. Seth was clear. There are infinite variables, genetic, environmental, karmic, entity-level agreements, but it does mean you have more agency than modern medicine admits. More responsibility, yes, but also more power in psyche, the fragmentation of self, mental illness, dissociation, identity fragmentation. Seth described these as cases where the monadic coalitions within the personality split, refusing to maintain the unified self. Schizophrenia, severe dissociative disorders. Seth said these involve the personality's monadic cluster, fracturing into competing sub-personalities, each one trying to assert dominance, each one convinced it's the real self. This isn't possession. It's not an external invasion. It's internal rebellion. The monads forming the personality are no longer cooperating with the overarching intent of the entity. They're fragmenting into smaller coalitions, each one creating its own narrative, its own sense of I. And here's the unsettling truth Seth forced us to confront. Monads are not slaves to form. They participate in reality's, bodies, selves voluntarily. And when they stop volunteering, when they withdraw their consent, the structure, whether it's a star, a body, or a mind, begins to unravel. But Seth didn't leave us here. He didn't frame this as hopeless, because if monads can withdraw, they can also be invited back. Through intent, through will, through the personality reasserting its organizing principle and saying, this is who we are. This is the pattern we're forming. Join us. Healing, Seth taught, is not about fixing what's broken. It's about realigning the coalitions, reminding the monads why they agreed to be you in the first place. And that brings us to the teaching that was truly forbidden, the one that almost no one wanted to hear. Here's why Seth's monad teaching was buried. Here's why it never made it into the mainstream spiritual conversation, even among dedicated Seth readers, because it implies that the individual soul, the eternal, unchanging essence most spiritual traditions promise, doesn't exist. Or more precisely, it exists only as a temporary coalition of monads that will eventually dissolve, scatter, and reorganize into entirely different forms. Let me sit with that for a moment because it's the hardest part of this teaching to accept. If you are a monadic cluster, not an eternal soul, then you, the personality reading these words, the person with your name, your memories, your sense of continuity are finite. Not just your body, not just your memories, but the very sense of I that feels so permanent, so central to everything you experience. Seth taught that personalities can persist across multiple lifetimes. That's true. And entities, oversouls, can persist across thousands of incarnations. Also true. But even entities eventually dissolve back into all that is. And even all that is, Seth hinted, might be a coalition within something larger, something that also eventually dissolves and reforms. There is no final, unchanging you at the core. There are only monads endlessly recombining, endlessly creating new selves that each believe they're the center of existence for a little while, before dissolving and pretending to be someone else. This teaching was forbidden because it destabilizes the spiritual seeker's ultimate hope, the hope that says, beneath the roles, the traumas, the incarnations, the pain, there's a true self waiting to be discovered, a self that's permanent, that's pure, that's finally safe. Seth's monad framework says there is no true self. There is only process, only becoming, only the eternal dance of monads pretending to be individuals long enough to experience what individuality feels like, then dissolving and pretending to be someone else. And here's why this terrified people. If there's no eternal soul, what's the point? Why bother growing, healing, evolving, if it's all going to dissolve anyway? But Seth didn't present this as nihilistic. He flipped it. He said, if there's no eternal soul to protect, no final self to perfect, then you're free, free to play, free to experiment, free to fail spectacularly, to dissolve, to reform, without fear of permanent damage. The monad cannot be harmed. It cannot be destroyed. It can only create, experience, and create again. So the personality, this version of you, the one living this life, doesn't need to be perfect, doesn't need to get it all right, because it's not the final version. It's one experiment in an infinite series of experiments, and when it ends, the monads will take everything they learned and use it to create something new. Your pain matters, your growth matters, your love, your art, your struggles, they matter. Not because they're building an eternal monument called your soul, but because they're data, their experience, their creative exploration that enriches the entire monadic network you're part of. When you dissolve, you don't disappear, you scatter, and the pattern that was you echoes forward, a signature in the field, a memory in the architecture. Seth put it this way, and I'm paraphrasing because I can't find the exact quote, but the essence was, you are not permanent, but you are eternal, because the creativity that formed you never stops. It just changes form. And here's the final piece, the one that makes this bearable. You chose this, not your personality. Your personality can't choose which monad it's made of, but your entity chose. The larger coalition organizing your incarnations chose to create this particular pattern, this particular frequency, because it wanted to experience you. You're not a mistake. You're not a cosmic accident. You're a deliberate experiment in consciousness, organized by monads that have been creating reality since before time began, and they chose to create this. Your laughter, your heartbreak, your confusion, your wonder, because it's beautiful and worth creating and worth dissolving when it's done so they can create something else. That's why this teaching was forbidden. Not because it's nihilistic, but because it removes the safety net. There's no eternal soul to cling to. There's only the creative process itself and your willingness to participate in it without needing guarantees. And now, finally, let's make this practical. Let's see if you can feel the monadic layer of your own existence. If Seth is right, if you are a coalition of monads pulsing in and out of existence billions of times per second, then you should be able to feel it, not as an abstract concept, but as direct experience. Seth offered techniques, loosely described, never rigid, for becoming aware of the monadic layer beneath your conscious experience. I want to share 3 of them with you, framed as interpretive tools inspired by Seth's framework. These aren't guaranteed to work. They're not step-by-step instructions with predictable results. They're invitations, experiments, ways of redirecting your attention toward the architecture beneath the self. Technique 1, the gap meditation. Sit in silence, no music, no distractions, and focus on the space between thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. You've meditated on thoughts before, watching them arise and pass. This is different. This is about the gap, the emptiness that separates one thought from the next. Seth said this gap is the out phase of the monadic pulse, the instant when your consciousness temporarily withdraws into framework 2, the dimension of infinite probability. It's the moment you cease to exist in physical reality just for a microsecond before pulsing back in. Most people can't sustain awareness in the gap. The mind rushes to fill it with another thought, another sensation, another distraction. But with practice, you can extend your awareness into the gap. You can stay there just for a moment and experience the discontinuity of existence directly. What does it feel like? Some people report a sense of vast spaciousness, like falling into an infinite void that's somehow warm, somehow safe. Others describe it as a flicker, a blink, a momentary sense of not being that's oddly peaceful. Seth said it feels like coming home, because at the monadic level, you're not bound by form, by identity, by the exhausting work of pretending to be an individual. If you try this, don't force it, don't strain. Just sit and watch for the gaps, and when you find one, gently rest your attention there.